Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Aesthetic and Wellness Edge. I'm your host, Bethany Gifford, and this podcast where leaders in aesthetics and wellness share their real-world stories, challenges, and strategies for growth. Today, I am joined by someone who brings a truly unique perspective to the aesthetic and dermatology world, blending biomedical engineering, corporate healthcare consulting, and hands-on practice management. He is the co-founder of Balanced Skin Dermatology Aesthetics in Newport Beach, California. But first, a word from our sponsor. Anshul Maheshwari. Hold on one second. I got a little flag on my
No
end.
worries. Yeah, no worries. And yeah, it's Maheshwari. Yeah,
Yeah,
I know it's hard. It's a long one. Yeah,
I know. My thing went up real quick, and I was like, "Oh, Maheshwari." Yeah.
yep, you got it.
Okay, it's thinking. Sorry.
No worries.
Mm,
Yeah, I see like an uploading thing happening on my
yeah,
end. So yeah,
having a moment too. That's
just
normal.
keep going
That'll
with
go
it.
through. So.
Okay, gotcha.
And Shul Maheshwari, co-founder of Balanced Skin, alongside wife, Dr. Tia Paul, a dermatologist with a focus on skin color and advanced laser treatments. Together, they built a practice in one of the most competitive markets in the country. And Shul brings himself and experience from a medical device startup, pharma consulting, business strategy, which gives him a fresh and analytical lens on what it really takes to start and grow in this industry. And Shul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bethany. It was awesome.
All right, let's start from the beginning. Your path started in biomedical engineering and then moved into healthcare consulting and pharma before aesthetics. Can you kind of walk through your journey?
Sure, sure. I'll even, if you don't mind, I'll start even earlier than that. I think it sort of
Yeah.
makes me who I am and sort of got me into this space and sort of brings perspectives that I think would be unique, right? I think so. So I was born in India, but when I was two, my family moved to Thailand. So we spent like yeah, close to 15 years in Thailand, where again, I was an immigrant, sort of in a different country, trying to navigate life there, and went to an American international school there. So again, was learning, the American curriculum, and ultimately, sort of figured that I did want to come to the U.S. To study, right, for higher education. So I ended up coming here. Moved quite a few different cities. Was in Chicago for my undergrad. Went to New York. Was in Boston for work, and then moved to Miami, and finally out here in Orange County. Um, my academic journey, like I said, began in Chicago, where I sort of came for studies in undergrad in biomedical engineering, and did a master's in the same discipline in New York, and that's where I met my wife, who ended up taking the track to go down the medical route. So together we sort of had, I would say, parallel routes to where we are today, but alongside, I think, having the same disciplines, sort of the same goals, same backgrounds, definitely played a role in shaping our goals in the future. Um, so in terms of biomedical engineering, like I think that's where I really learned the science of life, life sciences and healthcare. But ultimately, after I got done with my studies, I knew I wanted to learn a little bit more about commercialization of medical technology and sort of what the business side of healthcare looks like. And so alongside that, I ended up moving to Boston and joined an early stage startup slash incubator, which was looking into commercializing these diagnostic technologies. Right now, I'm going to be a little bit of a nerd here, but ultimately, it's taking a small sample of bodily fluid. It could be blood. It could be I guess like different fluids in the body, and you could do different tests to determine whether I think we had applications in cancer, in oncology, in infectious diseases, and then some other lab applications. But really, it was the platform that we had. It was like a small chip that would process these samples, and then it could be used for various different applications. That's where I sort of learned not only how do you bring a technology to market, right? So what are the regulatory, obstacles that you have to get through, but also what does it mean from identifying who the right partner is, what the customer would look like, how would you sort of brand a particular technology in this whole healthcare space, which is highly regulated. So that was my first taste of understanding the business side of healthcare. I think along the same theme, the next step was to get into healthcare consulting. So I moved over to New York then, and I joined, I stayed for two consulting firms, and really that helped me understand now the broader business of healthcare. Right, my clients were the top 50 global pharma companies, top 50 medical device companies, and then some healthcare organizations, where I learned like what are the challenges that they face broadly, but then also at a more tactical level. Right, how do you sort of solve problems, work with people, and then of course bring that expertise of the unique expertise that you have around healthcare and life sciences. And just I think one more word on that, right? Like this space is very interesting for me, at least when I say healthcare in general, because it's such an important space, right? It's evergreen, right? It's an industry that's always going to be there, but there's also a certain barrier to entry for folks, right? Like I think if you enter different industries like consumer or retail, right, the barrier to entry is a bit lower versus in healthcare there's a specialized knowledge that you need, and knowledge of regulations, knowledge of science that allows you to differentiate yourself in this industry. So that's what got me interested. Stayed in consulting for quite a few years, hopped onto a pharma company for a couple of years, and then ultimately moved into entrepreneurship, with my wife on a couple of different projects, which we can go deeper into in the next few questions.
Absolutely. I mean, you've mixed your corporate background and your entrepreneurial background, and they just super complement each other. Plus your world of knowledge with medicine. So that is amazing. I mean, Newport Beach. That is a highly competitive market. What sets you guys apart, with Balanced Skin? I know that you guys kind of emphasize on the care for skin of color, which is huge, especially with laser treatments. So has that been kind of your cornerstone for the practice identity?
It has been. I'll outline a few unique things, right? Like you're completely right. Newport Beach is it's a double-edged sword, right? It's sort of where you want to be, where there's such high demand for sort of aesthetic services, but on the flip side, there's so many providers and there's high supply too, right? So how do you create a business out here where you're not just playing the competitive game all the time, and ultimately are still able to capture that demand that sort of Newport Beach have, right? Newport Beach has. The interesting thing about this market is again, it's I don't want to say it's fully immune, but it's slightly more immune to external fluctuations and trends, right? People still have sort of money to spend on some of these treatments that might be discretionary spend. So in terms of deciding, why we wanted to open sort of in Newport Beach, was an interesting exercise, right? I think we knew that's where the demand was. We knew if we wanted to survive and sort of open and be successful in this space, we had to be different and be differentiated. And so I remember just on going on long walks with my wife, just talking through like, well, how are we going to do this, right? And what's going to make us stand out and different? And I'd outline four areas on what differentiates us. So one, of course, being the doctor herself, right? Dr. Tia Paul, who's my wife, and she has great credentials, right? She's gone to school at Harvard, MIT. She's done a residency at University of Miami. So she has good credentials, but also the quality of care and the feedback she had received at her previous gigs, right, where she was working at a large hospital system, sort of gave us the confidence that she's able to provide high quality care, and get the outcomes that folks would desire. So that's like the cornerstone of any medical practice or any sort of even med spa, right, where can you provide the outcomes that people are looking for? Because if you can't, then you should just forget about it, right? So that was the first piece, and we were pretty confident on that first pillar. I think the second one was really around the skin of color, which you touched upon earlier, right? I think it is an underserved population, right? And interestingly enough, right, Orange County, Newport Beach, and the surrounding areas, Irvine, Costa Mesa, right, have significant populations of folks who have melanated skin, right, and that are Fitzpatrick skins, 3+, right? And so we looked at the area, and yes, there were folks that were of course providing services, but what we did learn was no one really called that out as a special sort of category, right? Like usually folks go in and they have thought, hey, look, why would I exclude other skin types? We're not excluding anyone, right? I think it's about really calling out where do you want to specialize in, because ultimately we have all kinds of people that come to our clinic, but really where the messaging lacked was the skin of color sort of addressing those concerns. And the biggest thing there, which we're hearing from a lot of folks, was they go into derm practices, they go to med spas, they get lasers done, and ultimately, if you're not well versed in addressing the skin of color, you might see scarring, you might see hyperpigmentation, hypopigmentation. And so, Dr. Paul really took the time to understand the population, their concerns, but also understand and create her own techniques to address concerns in that skin of color population. So those two. I think the third thing was really around the location, right? I think so. If you look at Newport Beach, the concentration of all med spas and dermatology practices are within this area called Fashion Island. Okay, there's like this little, there's a
I know
mall,
it well.
and there's if you go into Google and you search there, like 50 plus practices will pop up there, right?
Mhm.
And so yes, folks go there. It's next to a mall. You think about all those things, but I think we were a little different in our approach. We ended up going to I want to say the edge of Newport, closer towards Irvine, Costa Mesa, and Tustin, because we also wanted to pull those populations in and be accessible to them. So we deliberately picked a location which is in the intersection of those communities, right? So we also pull from those populations, but also close to the local airport here. And the reason being, like I said, when we do advertise skin of color, we have folks that come from out of state and out of country to come see Dr. Paul because, if you're claiming you're a color expert, folks will fly in to come see you, and so that's what's been happening. They're very happy that we're close to an airport, and that location, and so the location is always a big factor in deciding where you want to open your practice. And I know this is a long answer. The last question, last piece, which is also an important piece, is really how do you become that sort of uh, position yourself as the center of excellence for skincare and dermatology. Right? There are many ways to do it. Right? Some people just put it in their name. Hey, we're the Institute of Skincare, but what's the proof in that? Right? I think what we did was the way we planned our practice out was we built it in such a way that there's space for product launches and for community events and for doing more than just it being a clinic, right? And the reason being that is, first of all, we want to be part of the community. We have events where we involve the community in the healthcare and beauty space. But secondly, we work with a lot of companies to have their product launches in our space. So what that does is, it of course, we're in the right space. We have all the tools. We have the right audience coming in. We have a good peer group of dermatologists that want to come in and learn. But secondly, it gives us that that sort of branding and also the credentialing that hey, we do look at the latest and greatest technology and we launch them in our practice. So those things make us pretty unique, I'd say.
That's amazing. I know in our previous conversation you had kind of talked about pulling patients in instead of pushing services and for marketing. Could you kind of touch on what that looks like in your practice?
Definitely, and that's I think I try to give that advice to quite a lot of dermatologists starting out their practice, right? And people have different approaches, right? I think one thing I make very clear is like there's not only one way to success. There are many different paths to it, and you do what makes sense to you. But one thing I will realize is that that I've realized is that you could go out and sort of do all the marketing push that you want, right? Which is good. You need to build that awareness, but ultimately, building sustainable practice where you're not relying always on push ads or even sales or making calls out is to have people come to you, right? To have that brand, to have that sort of word of mouth being spread about the uniqueness and the quality of care that's coming from your practice, and of course the experience. And along those lines, like what I try to tell folks is like the exercise that both my wife and I went through is like what makes us different, what makes us unique, right? What can we blend in with our background, our expertise? What do we bring to the table? But also what problems we want to solve. Really take some time to think through that, and really blend it into sort of your branding and sort of your messaging. That what your website, of course, but everything else that you put out there in the on the internet, right, and everywhere else. I think that multiplies at time as time goes on. People know you for a very specific thing and have a certain sort of vision in mind when they hear your balanced skin dermatology or when they hear Dr. Tia Paul. And so I'd recommend folks like, hey, yes, you could always be like, hey, look, this is just a business. It brings cash in. It allows me to sort of put food on the table. That's great. You could run a practice that way, which is like you're just going through the operations and you're just putting more investing money into the advertising to bring people in. You don't care what kind of people are coming in, which is fine. That approach also works. But I think for a sustainable sort of low hands-on approach, I'd say you really think through the why early on and you build that into every marketing aspect, and then it just snowballs into folks coming in.
That's amazing. Yeah, branding is, people want to brand themselves as like one-stop shops, certain med spas, certain derms, everything like that. when you have a message, that really resonates and you hit home with that, not just social media wise, but, internally with your patients, I think that
For sure.
just skyrockets everything. So
Agree.
you guys have
100%.
definitely been able to do that. So that is amazing. I mean, you personally manage wearing multiple hats in the business. I mean, you're like strategy, operations, finance. I mean, how do you get everything like compartmentalized and
Yeah,
running the
yeah.
business? Like, what advice would you give people that are also doing the same?
That's a great question, right? I think you know I'm so grateful that it's just not one of us running a business, right? Like my wife or myself, right? I think we do things together, so that definitely helps in every way, right? It's sort of the whole synergistic, element to it, right? One plus one equals to more than two, right? So I think that definitely helps. I think in terms of like how to think about at least the business side of running a practice, right? And I can go into what our philosophy and structure and method has been, right? Um, you know, Juggling is difficult, right? I'm still working for Allergan Aesthetics, right? So which is my day job where I work in corporate strategy for the manufacturers of Botox and sort of the filler product lines and other aesthetic devices and technologies. But on the practice side, really, I like to think of two big buckets, and then within the business bucket, there I want to say like five other small buckets, right? So let me go through that. So I think at the very top you have the medical side of things, right? Which is like making sure the doctor is knows what they're doing, getting the outcomes, can do the medical delivery of care, right? And so that's again Dr. Tia Paul. She's amazing at that. She's has the experience. She's gets the outcomes that folks are looking for. That's the medical bucket, right? And I have some understanding, but not the detailed understanding that the doctor has, of course. Now, on the business side, I've broken it down into, I would say, five major areas, right? So, and honestly, it comes from, I've learned this from working with big organizations, right? They usually have big functions, right? Marketing is a big function, finance is a big function, HR is a big function. So, using that similar sort of structuring, I sort of followed the same methodology when I implemented it in Balanced Skin Dermatology, where even the startup phase, right? You have the administrative bucket where you're like, okay, I need to get all the legal stuff handled, right? I need to have the contracts for the lease. I need to have, the disability insurances, contracting, credentialing with insurance companies, right? That's like administrative. Even finance sort of falls into that. You want to have your bank loans if you need. You want to have some forecasting. You want to, make sure you're sort of have an accountant on hand, right? That can balance your books. So that's all administrative, and then other documentation that comes in like day to day where you have to like fill out some forms for business purposes. I put that under the big administrative bucket. That itself is a pretty large one, but
Yeah, it's a big
we
bucket.
mark that up, right? The second bit is the marketing bucket, right? So I think this is where again branding, right? What differentiates you? What channels are you going out with, right? Paid ads, and then even word of mouth and sort of how do you get patients to give you feedback, right? That's all within the marketing bucket. So there are a lot of sub activities within them, but that's one at least compartment that I think of. The third compartment is HR, so people management, right? Managing your staff, managing, do they understand their role, right? Do they understand their responsibilities? Are they, following our guidelines, right? Are they coming up with ideas? Or are they happy, right? So that whole HR bucket is one other big bucket, and then I think I'm at the fourth one. Fourth one is technology, right? So technology again is around like basic things like okay, does everything work? Does the phone work? Do the lights work? That's the basic technology. But the higher order of things are like okay, what technology do I want to invest in? Right? What laser do I want? What sort of facial device I want? Right? So that's all their technology buckets, and that helps me again think through like okay, well, even if I put a new technology in, do I have the outlet for it? Right? So it's all connected in some ways, right? And then I think that was it, right? That was five. so
But
yeah, so those are the buckets, and what helps is once I do that, we basically are able to delegate, right? So I can say, hey, look, I'm in charge of the admin, the marketing. You're in charge of HR because you're working closely with people, right? Technology we sort of do together because there's a medical aspect to it and an
yeah,
investment aspect to it. So I think once you carve it out those buckets, then you can sort of delegate and see, hey, how much involved you want to be in one or the other.
absolutely. Yeah, we technology definitely is multifaceted for that, as well as marketing and
Sure.
HR and everything included. People don't realize, sometimes it's not one person. Sometimes it's
Right.
multiple people. Sometimes it's multiple systems. Sometimes it's automated, sometimes it's hand holding. Like it's just, it really goes all the ways
Completely
for
agree, right?
practice for
And
sure.
and it's easy to get overwhelmed, right? There's so much to do, right? So
Oh yeah.
I always recommend, at least the folks I'm advising, I'm like, look, if you put some structure in place, that at least helps it like compartmentalize in your head. And then secondly, with each compartment, you can then have your sort of to dos and activities and roles and responsibilities. So like it just makes it clean versus like I have a running to do list for everything and then like everything's all over the place. Like which is fine. Some people are high functioning and they can manage that. But I think structuring at least helps with not only me personally, but also then delegating to other staff and other folks that are in the picture.
100%. Yeah, we love Trello. That works very well. I mean, you've helped a lot of peers, in the dermatology world kind of start and grow their businesses. What's kind of the number one or number two common pitfalls that you see, and how can like new practice owners kind of avoid them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before I get into that, right, like I said, I really value that, we also had mentors when we were starting whatever projects we've been on, right? So I think, we've been pretty good with, managing relationships and keeping them. And of course, not being afraid to ask when we need help, right?
Yeah.
And I recommend that, the same for folks that are starting out, right? Hey, look, yes, there's a lot of resources online, which is great, but sometimes there's things that are not written that are in someone's head that sometimes help a lot. And so, in terms of helping folks, right? A lot of times, I've been fortunate enough that my wife has a pretty large network of dermatologists and providers, across the country. And, I have that sort of skill set from the business side of healthcare. So usually what ends up happening is, my wife will speak to someone, they'll have some questions, they'll be like, hey, look, talk to my husband, right? He sort of, he does this, he knows this. And so I'm glad that she's able to connect me to a lot of folks. But generally what I've seen is like I said, I think the first thing is like, there's so much to do, right? Like there's so much. Should I be doing this? What decision should I be making? It's always about like this seems like a big hairy thing. How do I even like get there, right? So the first thing is like, of course, having a guide always helps, but that's where I sort of be like, okay, let's talk through the big buckets first, which I just mentioned, and let's talk about what needs to be prioritized at what time. A lot of folks will be like, before they've even like figured out where they want to open, they're talking about, I want this marketing campaign to launch, right? I'm like, yes, that will come, but let's not put the cart before the horse, right? So,
Yeah.
so things like that, I think come up quite a bit where they're like, okay, I need to think about credentialing. I'm like, yes, you should think about credentialing early on because it takes time to get on insurances. But again, there's a right time for that, right? I think first is like, let's get the legal stuff out of the way. What is your, are you going to set up a professional corporation, an LLC? What location do you want, right? How many folks are you looking to service? How big the space, how big of a space do you need? So those are the things that you want to address first, and I think that's where I come in and help them out. Like, what comes first, second, third, right? I think the second thing is a little bit more mature practices once they are operating, and this comes across every survey I've seen, every person I've spoken to is people management, right? I think that's such a tough nut to crack where there's high turnover, right? Staff is not doing what they're supposed to. I have to micromanage, et cetera, and that really, a lot of people when they leave, like I just want to sell my practice, I can't do this anymore. It comes down to that issue. So what my advice and guidance to that is, and I've learned the hard way on that too, is is it's trying to find the folks that will fit in to your vision and way of doing things. And let me clarify that a little bit, right? So I think when we launched Balanced Skin Dermatology, we were looking for very experienced staff, which is helpful, right, in many ways. So our first hires were folks who had 15 years experience, and it was really helpful at the time because when they came in, we were also trying to figure out what we're doing. They could bring in some experience that they had, right, which is great. However, what we ran into very soon was our way of doing things was clashing with some of the staff, right? They're like, no, no, this is not how we did it back in the day. I'm like, we're trying to do things differently here. We're not trying to do
Yeah.
it the same way, right? So how do you get around that, right? So I think we made some tough decisions. We had to sort of let go, right? But ultimately we realized, look, there are many folks who want to come and learn from Dr. Paul and be part of the practice. A lot of them are early in their careers, right? They're still figuring things out. So we bring those folks in. We give them a basically a training program, right? If they're really interested, they come in. They learn every aspect of running a practice, and we're able to shape them in the way that we run the practice. And then that builds retention. People want to stay, and so we've had the staff that have stayed there. They've stayed there for yeah, for gosh, like the entire time, like with no complaints. So I'd recommend getting folks that you can build the practice with. It's getting kind of loud. Do you hear it? Sorry.
We'll wait for just 1 minute. Seems to go away.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's like I hear it in my
It
speaker.
hasn't been like that, so it's fine. I think it's fine. Yeah. All
Okay,
right,
it's
cool.
going down. It's going down. Okay, there you go.
Well, that's incredible that, you're just taking all your business knowledge, all your wealth of medical knowledge, and you guys are just combining it as a couple. And I love that. We work with a lot of husband and wife teams, and I haven't really seen such a well-oiled machine like you guys have. So it's extremely significant, and I'm sure it portrays into your clientele and into your brand as well. But speaking about your wife, because I can't leave her out, she has built a significant presence on social media. How has her presence kind of contributed to your practice growth?
Yeah, that's a great one, right? And I'd be amiss if I didn't mention that as part of the success too, for sure, right? What I'll do is I'll give you a story of how she got into it and then how it's helped the practice, right? I remember like this was pandemic times, right? Like Q1, Q2 of 2020 when things were just like, okay, what's going on? And I was sort of on a break from my job because they're like, hey, look, we don't have any work, so let's just let's give you the time off that you need. Same thing with my wife, right? Dermatology is not a essential medical service,
Yeah.
so we were both at home and we're like, hey, look, let's plan something, let's do something out, right? Let's come up with a mission, around what we want to do and what really speaks to us. And I remember like she was saying, hey, I really want to make sure that I'm able to spread the word around dermatological health and conditions, right? I have this, you know, knowledge in my head, and how do I make it accessible to the layman, right? And so along that lines, we're like, look, okay, let's start thinking about what sort of messaging we want to put together. And I remember the early days we used to create like these slides that we used to post on Instagram, right? And there was little traction, but we kept doing it because we were like, hey, look, let's talk about acne, right? Let's talk about what food you should be eating. Let's talk about all the sort of infectious diseases. So we had a range of topics that we she'd come up with the content, right? I'd sort of create the slide, and we'd post it every other day. And so we were doing that for during the pandemic for like 3-4 months. And then coming like right as we were getting into like end of 2020, early 2021, there was like a big like a surge in social media, especially around skincare. So TikTok, really came on the people's sort of psyche around that time, and she
Yep.
started making video content, right? So I think 2021 was when we were just creating a lot of video content. She was very much into it, and it was reaching a lot of folks, and so she gained a quite a large following around that time. And so both around Instagram and TikTok, she has about 500,000 followers combined. And people like her content. You tend to find the people that speak to you. So the folks that are following her, engage with her, really like the content that really likes the content that she puts out. So then what ended up happening was she worked back at the hospital organization, did a stint at a private practice, and ultimately she always knew she wanted to start her own practice. And we both were like, hey, look, at some point we got to start our own business, right? And we had some constraints. We were on work visas, and we were not allowed to start businesses. But ultimately, we got our permanent residency, so we launched Balanced Skin Dermatology. What the social media presence allowed us to do was have a strong starting point where a lot of folks will have organic growth once they launch. We had folks that were already sort of knocking on our doors before we began, right? So I think that was immensely helpful, right? So I remember the early days, we built a list of all the folks that we knew and the folks that would be interested, and we ran some email campaigns. But we already had a big list of folks who wanted to see her within the first or second month. So, and that
Amazing.
I'll give yeah, exactly, right. So this is a long story, but the one sort of compact piece of advice I want to give providers, doctors, right, anyone who's looking to get into aesthetics and build a practice, and sort of what should they do around social media, right? Look, you don't have to be big on social media. You don't have to gain a following. You don't have to do all the stuff that every social media influencer, dermatologist influencer does. But what I will say is you should have a presence, right? I tell that to everyone. So now when the customer or the patient looks folks up for services, they just don't look at one point. They just don't look at your website or your Google reviews. They look at 4 or 5 different touch points, right? To get a better sense of your practice, of yourself. And so I would recommend everyone just have presence on there, right? And just talk about a few things that, your day to day, who you are, how you speak, your mannerisms, right? Because there are people that will connect to that. And they almost feel like they know you before they even enter your practice. So my one piece of advice is, yes, don't do it to try to get, become an influencer, but just to have a presence, and folks get to know you before they even enter your practice.
That's amazing. Very good advice. Yeah, we've worked with several people that didn't have no presence, and they didn't want to, a little camera shy, and it doesn't necessarily have to be you. It just has to be,
Exactly.
your practice and
Exactly.
your brand and your mission, and to make it solid. And I think
Mhm.
that's huge. Absolutely
No,
huge.
completely. And
Well,
that's
what's next on the horizon for you guys? 6 to 12 months? Do you guys
yeah,
have
yeah.
anything
For
going
sure.
on?
We've definitely gotten the bug of entrepreneurship, right? And we've enjoyed working together so much, right? There's some couples that can make it work. There's some that are like, hey, I would never get into business with you, right? So somehow we made it work. And on the horizon, like, I think we both bring a unique set of skills, and together we sort of cover quite a lot of bases. And so the other business has been like on an advisory role front. And the thought around that is, like, again, we work with a range of clients on a range of projects, right? So, like, the way I like to categorize the business that we're working on is in three big categories, right? One is around helping the provider, the medical professional, right? It's been so like I said, Dr. Paul has a mission around educating around skincare conditions. My mission has been to help medical providers and medical professionals be more empowered to start their own businesses, right? And the reason being is because I feel like the medical profession has changed quite a bit in the last 20 years, right? Not for the better, but for the worse. As a provider, there's so much regulation, documentation you have to deal with. You're seeing less people and customers and patients while you're addressing so many other things, right? So, how do you gain more independence and flexibility while also making more income than you would as being a salaried professional? Is something that speaks to me, and I'd like to sort of get more and more people to realize, hey, look, do something for yourself, right? As an entrepreneur, it doesn't have to mean starting your own practice. It could be anything, right? It could be, writing a book, investing in real estate, or whatever, right? Do something that's entrepreneurial, that just doesn't tie you to just a medical profession, where now it's just guidelines are being pushed to you,
Mm.
protocols, documents, right? And you didn't get into medicine for that reason, right? So, so one piece is advising a lot of medical professionals to, like, think through what excites them and how do you make a business out of it? How do you create value, right? Because as doctors, as medical providers, you have so much value that a lot of people don't and are seeking for. So how do you create that value and then commercialize it, right? So that's one piece. The second piece is early stage companies. So a lot of early stage companies within the skincare world, medical devices, mostly in the aesthetics and dermatology space, are looking for guidance around how to navigate this environment, like commercially, but also medically. So that's where Dr. Paul will help with formulation, will help with medical guidance, be a CMO, right? And then I help with how do you actually bring these things to market, right? How would you navigate an uncertain environment? And so we advise a lot of early stage companies, but we don't take any monetary. We don't charge them at all. All we do is we just come on the board. We'll get some equity, right? But we're happy to provide any help we need, because I know they're cash strapped, right? And we understand that. The
Absolutely.
third piece is
That's
with
amazing.
yeah, and the third one is with large companies, right? So we have we get on advisory boards for L'Oreal, for Cynosure laser companies, right? So these are big global pharma medical device companies that are looking for specific knowledge on their products, their customers, and so we're able to get on some boards and help them out that way.
You guys are all over the place, and you are rocking every moment of this. It's a
And, and,
great,
and we love it. We love every part
yeah,
of it.
and such a great power team. I love it. I love seeing that. That's the dream for
Mhm.
sure. Well, gosh, thank you so much for joining us and giving us an absolute world of knowledge. I know that a lot of people out there are going to get a lot of help and aid and steps and tools. And your buckets, I love the buckets. That's amazing. All compartmentalized. You got to like organize. I love it.
Yeah, yeah,
I
no,
love it all. Well, tell the listeners where they can reach you, find you. They can find your wife, Dr. Tia Paul,
yeah.
and how they can get a hold of you for advising.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, definitely. I mean, generally, folks, like I said, we do it very organically, right? It's word of mouth. But again, if you do want to look us up, right, you can always go to www.balancedskin.com. We are opening an official page and site and for the advisory business. So, we'll get to that. But right now, balanceskin.com is where you can reach us. Ultimately, you can also always reach out on social media, right? My wife's handles on IG are Dr. Tia Paul, Tiapaul. And then, on Instagram, it's DrTiaPaul, Dr. Tia Paul, all in one go. So yeah, happy to hear from anyone who's interested and looking to learn or just have a chat. We're always game. Bethany, thanks for providing this platform. This was super helpful and a great experience. So thanks for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. And thank you all for tuning in to the Aesthetic and Wellness Edge. Until next time, stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe.